You are doing good?
Yeah, it's not as hot here. Well, it kind of was for the last 2 days, but last weekend a hurricane passed next to Veracruz, so it almost touched Guanajuato and it was raining. And I believe there's a hurricane coming to Baja California, so I believe this weekend will be raining again.
Roger, you are moving around. How are you?
I'm making lunch. But fortunately, I bought I bought some Japanese sushi.
Come. Hi, Roger. Roger, where are you?
It's Sarah Diamond.
I am in Sarah Diamond's wonderful house in the woods by the lake.
And I have a new hip,
Oh my goodness, congratulations.
but it's only 2 weeks old and hasn't learned how to walk yet.
But how are you? Can you walk okay?
I mean, isn't it amazing? I'm walking around right now holding my computer. I am wobbling a bit, as you can tell.
Be careful not to fall with the computer.
But no, the amazing thing is my hip operation was on August 12th, and I'm working better than I was the day before.
Really good. I'm very happy for you. Very happy.
And so I think my doctor is really a mechanical engineer, not a doctor. It's like when you replace a wheel, you have to undo some bolts, take the wheel off, put a new wheel on. But the wheel has no sensors in it. The engine has sensors, but not the wheel. I have no pain. What do you mean? They took my hip out and put a new one in and I have no pain?
Wonderful.
The miracles of sometimes modern medicine is good at mechanical engineering, and that's all you need.
And where is Joel? I can't see you, Joel. Or is it because this the pictures? I don't see you. Where are you?
No, you can't see me. Get it.
Now I see you, but it's okay. That's better now.
Where am I? Same place.
And you okay?
Yeah, kind of.
Kinda. Yeah. I talk to you later.
Yeah.
No, I was just telling everybody my happiness about being in Sarah's house up here in the woods. It's fantastic.
That's great. You look very
You should
happy.
ask her to join in the meeting.
Yeah, she's more than
Do you
welcome.
want to invite her? I can invite her, but she's
We'll add her to the agenda.
I can ask.
Yeah, if you'd like, why don't we start with Raphael for a little bit, and then maybe she can join in.
Okay.
Afterwards.
Sounds
Start
great.
with Raphael.
Start, Raphael, go.
Hello.
Go.
What do you want me to talk about?
Well.
Well, how about you start by talking a little bit about your very deeply interesting project you're working on.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to share that. Let's see. Let me pull up
what you're working on currently, you know?
Yeah, let me pull up the little proposal and share it with y'all. I think I've shared it with you, Joel, and I've shared it with Nina.
Yes.
If I can I share my screen?
Raphael, as a provocateur, you have to sign an NDA. No, we don't sign an NDA. Provocateurs do not sign
We
NDAs.
don't have NDAs.
I was like, okay. There's some information that should not leave this room. Being recorded, but so whenever I can get access to sharing my screen.
Vanya has to switch you to post, right?
I think, I don't know how to use Zoom, but I think
there we go.
I made you able to.
I can share now.
Okay.
Okay, so can you all see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so I've been working on this proposal for a piece that I'm calling an ecological oracle. Where I'm really interested in kind of the longitudinal social dynamics at play in light of climate change. And so this particular piece would be using the gallery space or an exhibition space as a microcosm of some of the social dynamics that we're currently faced with in light of climate change. Mainly, how does the current generation account for the experiences of future generations in light of some of the impacts that we're having as a society, whether we're cognizant of them or not. And also, it's really there's more of a subtle critique on aspects of capitalist realism, this kind of notion that capitalism is here to stay. We can't even imagine an alternative. And capitalism's placement or positioning of putting the onus on the individual as being solely responsible as a result, instead of putting the onus more on a collective or larger institutions. So it's really the intent of the piece. And so kind of was starting by taking a deeper research dive into some of the latest IPCC reports, some of the predictive models that are occurring, and basically everything that I found indicates that roughly by 2030, the planet's going to warm by 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is already impacting ecosystems and will continue to do so. And I think we all are probably familiar with the latest IPCC reports that have indicated that they're really like, if we don't turn things around right now, future generations are probably going to have a very limited experience on the planet. And in fact, nothing that we really do right now is going to change the trajectory of the next 30 years because of the half-life of CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. But all that is sort of the context of this piece. So the piece itself is interested in more of the potential game-like mechanics that could occur and some of the self-organization that may or may not occur with a group of participants interacting with an installation in an environment. So the work itself hinges on this small sculptural component, which has a body of water on the left-hand side that is serving as a metaphor for the amount of ice on the planet, and a beaker on the right-hand side that is empty, that has a nested smaller beaker of red dyed liquid. That beaker on the right represents melt, the melted ice. And the smaller beaker nested inside it represents a tipping point, the tipping point of climate change, essentially. There will be 9 tipping points, so scientists have projected, but this is just kind of collapsing them into one. Based on certain dynamics and sensor data that's being pulled in an environment in the gallery space. So there's certain data that'll be pulling that will serve as proxy for urbanization, for noise pollution. All of these will serve as these proxies of larger systems factors that are contributing to climate change. So the number of people in a space will be a proxy for urbanization. The sound of their voices will serve as a proxy for noise pollution. There'll be an air quality sensor that's capturing CO2 in the environment. So of course, number of people are in the space and breathing, et cetera, will increase the CO2 values. And then the sensor will also pull in particulate matter. And through this data, a space will be calibrated at the start of the exhibition to account for what are reasonable levels of number of people in the space, of all of these sensor data that I'm pulling. And as, say, more participants enter a space over time and increase and exceed the capacities of where it's been calibrated, water will flow from the reservoir to the melt. And vice versa, right? If less people interact, or if people are realizing that the effects of their voices are changing this, water will flow back from the melt beaker back into the reservoir. And what's interesting here is if there's continuous, if the sensor data continuously exceeds the limits that it's been calibrated to, the water in the melt will basically exceed its level, and it will start to mix with the tipping point beaker that's nested inside. And so as a result, the installation hits a tipping point wherein any action that participants take to try and mitigate the effects is futile, because the red dyed liquid has tainted the melt, and then that melt liquid will flow back into the reservoir that I'm showing in this time-lapse video here. So the question then kind of ensues, especially if I'm targeting this for something like an Isaiah or a festival where there'll be continuous visitation and potentially return visits. And here's a causal loop diagram that kind of describes everything. The installation will also have this visualization behind it to raise the awareness so that people have the visibility of their impacts. So the left-hand side will show where it's been calibrated, and the right-hand side will show the current state and what's happening. So you'll be able to start to learn and anticipate what's going on. And I'll be doing some machine learning to use all of that data to then make a time series-based prediction as to when the tipping point will occur. And so the question that I have is, if you have the awareness of your impacts in a space, will participants change their behavior? Will they not? And even if they do, the factors that we have control over are actually quite small in the grand scheme of things. You know, by being present in a space, I'm already contributing to aspects of urbanization, right? I can choose not to return. I can choose to return by myself and not with a group of people. But really, there are very few factors that we have control over. And so as a result, it's kind of a commentary on this almost paralysis that ends up happening, because we're like, we have to do something about climate change. We have to do something. But as individuals, the question that I have is really, what can we do that has a significant impact? And what onus is realistic to place on the individual versus the collective as a whole? So that's the piece. Easier to just read the description, I think, than for me to describe it, but I did my best. Happy to answer questions if anything didn't make sense, but would love feedback, would love, yeah, any discussions, any thoughts.
Well, I can begin. I really like this project. I've talked about it previously. I've had a little bit more time to think about it. So I just two things I would raise. One is I view it as a kind of thought experiment, and you just sort of elucidated, of challenging our notion of what impact is by visualizing it. And not that you're proposing any solutions or what one should do about the trajectory or not do about the trajectory, but just that very raising of the issue of what impact is and what does an individual versus a public or community have. So I think that's actually really interesting, and to be able to do it in such a simple kind of experiment, I think it's quite lovely that way. But as you were talking, I was thinking about this also, the nature of context for change. So we had talked about, well, where might you exhibit this or show this or whatever. And I think, obviously it makes sense to see it in a gallery or a museum or something like that. But I think one has to ask, is that the context for change, that the kind of impact that you're seeking, or that as a thought experiment where that might work, could it work better in some other maybe a site-specific installation environment somewhere, that the context of that environment would help shape their perceptions about the work. So and those are just two small points, but worth considering.
Yeah, I love that. Well, first, thank you for saying such nice things about it. And two, yeah, the question that I have then, you know, to me, I wonder if it's maybe not an either or, but an and,
Yeah.
you know, because I think, you know, showing it in the gallery space or showing it at like an Isaiah or, you know, potentially an Ars or something of the sort is like preaching to the choir in a sense, like, you know, it's like that sort of thing. So, whereas I think the potential that this type of project may have, if I pulled off if I can execute it well enough, you know, with the general public, is if it is more of a public art installation where it doesn't reach the traditional, you know, intelligentsia type crowd, that's actually something that would be quite interesting to observe and just see how it lands. You know, I'd just be curious how it lands with someone who isn't in the art world, who isn't in, you know, a Leonardo affiliated person, who isn't an academic. How does it land? Does it land? Or is it completely kind of washed over? That would be really interesting.
I really would like to say to this last point you mentioned, Raphael, that, you know, now there is a certain change in terms of where and how exhibitions are. And for example, the next Documenta, these guys who are going to organize it and curate it, they work on big public markets and they mix the market public with you know, the installation they put there. So it's not a really sophisticated part. So if you do something like that, you should look into Documenta right away.
I mean, I would love to. If you have ways of getting in touch with the right people, then absolutely.
I have participated in an event with them, so I can look up whom do I know about, and then I can share.
That'd be great. That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Anya, I think you had something. Oh, you're just scratching your chin. I thought you wanted to speak.
No.
Okay, so Raphael, as you know, pandemic provocateurs. I do not find this word, the post-pandemic provocateurs, PPP.
Yeah, I love that as a name.
I find your proposed work so unprovocative that I'm about to leave the meeting.
Fair. Why?
Well, how could the work be provocative? So maybe as the red dye and all that, suddenly at a certain point, the floor begins to tilt. And then, oh my goodness, what's going on? I better get out. Or the electricity goes off.
Yeah.
So how, I mean, obviously part of the anxiety about climate change is there'll be, I forget what it's called, the trigger points where suddenly there's a big jump.
Yeah.
And just to connect it, I read this morning an article in Science magazine about the evolving threat of the virus. New variants have changed the face of the pandemic. What will the virus do next? And they actually quote Catherine Hayes. We can predict the past, but we cannot predict the future.
Mm-hmm.
In a complex system. So, you know, climate change, like the virus, you know, and they have a wonderful diagram that shows I've got to read it again, but yeah, there's the Delta virus, the Gamma virus, the Theta virus, the Kappa virus, the Epsilon virus, the Iota virus. There are so many variants right now proliferating. Now, many of them are just benign and don't cause big problems. But, you know, in virology, you cannot predict which variant will kill the next billion people.
Mhm.
And obviously part of climate change is also that idea that there's a tip, as you said, there are tipping points where you can't go back anymore. You know,
Mhm.
suddenly the floor of your installation starts tilting, and people get frightened and have to leave. So how could you make your work provocative?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. I mean, a provocative question by nature. So I mean,
Without getting health and safety approval, right?
yeah,
Trust me, I'm an artist. I don't need to get approval to endanger people's lives.
yeah. So I mean, there's something that
Joel?
actually. Oh, go ahead, Joel.
Well, I think this opens up the portal we all wanted to go through, which was talk about ourselves in terms of, you know, what we've been working on in terms of this idea of, you know, where is the moment of provocation in a complex system, and how does that work, and so on and so forth. When you first started talking, Raphael, about this, you were talking about longitudinal change.
Mhm.
And that phrase, because we were talking about terminology earlier in the email exchange, and I was thinking about that, and Roger, in terms of what you were just was saying about predictability, that sort of Cartesian based model of thinking about how change works, you know, whether it's vertical or horizontal or, you know, dimensional in that way, it does beg this question of where does unpredictability lie, you know, where these moments of the tipping point occur. And you know when we start talking about trajectories of change, you know, what are we really talking about?
Mhm.
Really,
Mhm.
and when you start pulling back the covers, you know, and is that something that this work begins to illuminate in some way?
Yeah.
You know, it's a question. I mean, I don't have the answer. I'm just thinking. I'm just talking out loud.
I love this, and this is what, yeah, I'd love to talk less about so talk less. I want you all to talk about yourselves, so I don't talk about myself the whole time. With this piece in particular, though, to Roger, your point about being provocative, and to Joel, your point about longitudinal change or trajectory, or one of the questions that I have is from the things that I've read is, and I guess going back to the piece, is the tipping point really like a light switching on? Like, will we even notice, you know? And should the installation actually have that? Like, one of the things that's kind of interesting is, like, if when the tipping point happens, it's not like the world ends. It's like this kind of gradual, like, will we even be noticing it because it's an ongoing thing? Like, it's almost so gradual. And so there's almost that aspect that I'm mulling over of, it's not like an earthquake happens when the tipping point occurs. Is it perceptible? And should that occur, and how strong should that occur? You know, how intense should that moment be in time? Or is it more of a gradual thing where it's just like, you know, so almost like, imagine the tipping point happens, and the way the installation's been constructed, there is a clear switch that happens when the red mixes with the rest of the water.
I guess the question that I'm sort of mulling over in my head is this very idea of there being anything that we can actually call a tipping point. That it fits when you think in the Cartesian model of longitudinal or vertical change.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of figure out where on that axis the tipping point is, and that's a certain kind of gaze, if you will, about how the world works.
Yeah.
Right? And if we put that aside, and beg the question of, well, okay, so are there other ways to think about, and we've been talking a lot about this idea of slow emergence as part of how provocative change occurs. does it make, is there another way of thinking about change that would open up some opportunity for how this might be perceived or thought about?
Yeah.
As a thought experiment,
No, so as a thought experiment, this is really intriguing because it brings me back to, I recently read a paper that I'll forward to y'all. It's called Untroll. It was written by an ecological economist. This person calls themselves that. Who's talking about untroll as being the way of describing this post-truth era, and how being in a post-truth era has its foundational elements in more of this binary right, wrong, true, false way of thinking, which is a very Western Kuhn-based model of viewing the world. It's rooted in a Western epistemology, right? And what might be a non-Western epistemology of seeing this? It's not a binary, but rather a continuum. So this notion of slow emergence, I think, really follows suit with this idea of there's a gray area here. It's not just a black or white. It's not a true or false. It's not an on or off, but rather a slow emergence. Yeah, Roger.
Okay, so I have a suggestion. I just put in the chat that in 2029, there's a very large asteroid called Apophis, which is going to pass within 20,000 miles of the Earth and may in fact hit it. That's in 8 years. So maybe your installation could also have hanging above it a large rock. And at the end of the exhibition, the rock drops and destroys the installation. And there, I guess the thinking process is there are many possible catastrophes that may impact life on Earth in the coming decades. One is climate change, but one is a major asteroid impact. One is, you can make a list. So yes, we need to worry about climate change, but as you said, it's now too late to keep it from happening.
Yeah. It makes me wonder if this is
with the asteroid, it's not too late to get a rocket put together to go and shoot the asteroid and push it off course. But so I think really that the thought that came to my mind is that maybe you're too climate change focused. There are other impending dangers that may have similar probabilities. No, the climate change is 100% probable. So I just contradicted myself. But anyway, let me just let that float. Now, if you want to get people to think about how to avoid catastrophic events on this planet, climate change is one of them. And as you say, I forget what your phrase was, we kind of make a capitalist, what do you call it? Capitalist something.
Capitalist realism.
Realism.
Mark Fisher's phrase, not mine.
Yeah, no, that it's your personal responsibility to do something about it. The companies don't have to do anything about it.
Yeah.
It's you, the individual, that have to change your living habits.
What does the individual do about the asteroid?
Are you finished, Roger, or no? Okay.
Yes, I finished. Well, I've got a list of 12 other points for Raphael, but that'll be next in 2029. I'll send them to it.
I just see myself being the destruction artist. So there's an installation about climate change. There's an installation about the asteroid coming to hit us. Just continue collecting these, creating these experiences for people. The most depressing artist there was.
No, I like the term destruction artist. A destructionist. Destructionism.
Destructionism.
So I'm going back to the very simple basics. And in terms of basics, the project as an exhibition is it's an illumination for the general public.
Oracle. It's an oracle.
Sorry?
He called it an oracle.
Yes, the oracle is also illuminating certain physical points. And because of that, I think it is very important whether we talk about other, much more complex concepts which are around or connected. This because illumination is not only the general public needs it, even various professionals who in their own profession are maybe very well versed, but they don't necessarily contemplate on this basic level very important issues such as climate change.
That's a fair point. Yep.
Vanya just told us there's an impending catastrophe.
The Zoom catastrophe.
We're about to run out of Zoom time. The world is coming to an end. But she has the solution. We have to click. We just click on something.
Should we exit now and then rejoin, or do we wait until the timer runs out?
It's more fun to watch the screen go blank.
Yeah, you're in the mid-sentence.
Yeah. We're now.
Vanya, you've been very silent. We had a great session with you and your boyfriend last time. What would he think about this discussion? It's a bunch of academic bullshit.
I know I'm not too sciencey, but I do believe that capitalism is going to kill us. I mean, for the last 2 or 3 months, I've been recycling with my sister. I started noticing how many PET or bottles or cans we kept at home. Like every time we went out, we were like, oh, what if we buy a water bottle? Oh, what if we buy Coke or something like that? And I realized that I was dumping so many bottles, and I thought, am I able to change anything? And I started recycling them. And just 2 days ago, there's a recycler next to my home. So 2 days ago we went and we left, I believe, 1 kilo of bottles and 1 kilo of cans. And I was like, how come I've been like for 26 wasting so much things, like when I could be recycling? And I feel guilty if I don't do it, but at the same time I think like, okay, yeah, what we do as individuals is a speckle of dust in the grand scheme of what companies do. Because I mean, I can take a 3-minute shower, so there's enough water for Nestle to keep dragging out of us, or Coca-Cola. I mean, in Chiapas, people have stopped drinking water because Coca-Cola, first, Coca-Cola is cheaper, and second, they don't have access to clean water. So it's like, okay, yeah, I can try and save some things, but in the end, I don't think I'm helping as much as I would like to. And I told when we were waiting for the recycler to open, I told my sister, like, yeah, I can keep doing this to make myself feel better. But at the end of time, I know we've been saying like, we have 30 years to change our ways of consumption. We have 30 years to save the planet. I don't think we have that time, because I mean, Greta Thunberg can go and talk about global warming, and I can go and stand in front of the government office and talk about global warming, but as companies don't do something, like, they won't understand and they won't change their way of producing and consuming, and I don't know. So maybe I'm a pessimist, but I don't believe that something will change unless companies really do understand what's going on, and I don't think they will. I mean, it's not like the ghosts of Scrooge. I don't think the three ghosts of Christmas will visit Jeff Bezos in the midnight and will tell him, "Give me all of your money and stop producing." And it's
And
not like
I
that.
guess I'm going to contradict you in 2 minutes and 36 seconds, because part of the argument of autopoiesis that in a complex system, sometimes you can change the whole system by just changing the rules and interactions at the bottom of the system, and suddenly the whole system changes phase. So I agree with you. Just I do like you. I do recycling. I sort all the trash. It makes me feel good. It has no impact on climate change. I totally agree with you. My individual behavior doesn't. But if 1,000 people do it, maybe maybe you do trigger. I don't know.
And
Maybe it's too late.
that's what's interesting to me about some of the most recent things I've read around post-capitalist theory, which is to say that it's almost like a death by 1,000 paper cuts approach versus like the Marxist approach, which is like, hey, we're going to wait for this one massive revolution, this one massive worker movement. Whereas the post-capitalist thing are all these localized experiments, these localized interventions, even provocations that are trying to go against the grain of capitalism. And then very much like a complex system of smaller self-organizing seeds that then become interconnected and then grow in kind of this viral approach. So there is something that could be emergent from that. And that's really intriguing. I mean, we'll see how it plays out though, right? We'll see if these little post-capitalist kind of movements end up coalescing in a way, but there's a big distinction between the two.
I've seen a boom of thrifting here in Mexico. I've seen a lot of people retrieving clothes, like clothes they own or clothes they get donated from, and reselling them. And it's been kind of a slow emergence movement, but I've seen a bazaar. And my sister just last weekend went with his boyfriend to one, and their her boyfriend's grandparents passed away a few months ago due to COVID. And when they were cleaning the house to sell it, they found a lot of
In the I forget when it was now, actually. It was in the 1990s, I guess, or 80s. It was when the garage was thriving in Silicon Valley. I don't think it exists anymore, right?
I haven't talked to Mark in years. So
He's in Mexico.
He's in Mexico, yeah.
Okay, so before Zoom, I don't know how to say it. Okay, so I was telling that I've seen like a slow emergence of thrifting here in Mexico, and my sister just went last weekend with her boyfriend. But the thing is, some people have understood the way of doing it. Like, okay, so if you're recycling clothes, for it to be better than fast fashion, you should be doing it a little bit cheaper. And there's people selling it as if you just bought it from H&M or Hard Rock, and I mean, that's not the point. The point is to recycle clothes and kind of tackle the idea of fast fashion. So yeah, I think they're getting a hang of it, and I think that would be an example for people coming together to do one thing, which would be recycling clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I believe there's a lot of these kind of ideas on how to tackle or approach climate change better as individuals. And I mean, I'm not telling that, I'm not saying that I won't be trying to engage someone else on doing it, but I do believe that as long as companies don't help us, there won't be much change on it. And I mean, I've been trying to tell my mom that thrifting is better, but she thinks it's, I don't know, she was born in the 60s and she believes it's some kind of poor people thing. And whenever my sister and me try to go to the flea market and buy things, she's like, but why do you do that? And it's you're not poor, you have money. And it's I mean, last time she said that, I practically yelled at her like, Mom, we cannot keep doing the world as it was. We cannot keep consuming. And yeah, so I think she's become more interested on it, or more, she has more acceptance of it, I think. But yeah, I think there are things in recycling that do not belong as much as to how to work with climate change as maybe people's preconception of why do you recycle. Like, if you recycle and they give you 10 pesos, is it because you need 10 pesos? Because I can give them to you. If you recycle clothes, is it because you don't have money for new clothes? Because I can give them to you. So yeah, I don't think the problem comes as much as from how to work with climate change as it comes from how people believe doing some things make you less than them or something like that.
Yeah, I think that, what you're hitting on is was pretty interesting in the sense of like, how do norms and sociocultural behaviors influence aspects of behavior, right? So it's like, how does the environment that you live within end up influencing your interactions as an individual, and maybe even how you relate to companies, for example, or what you say about companies, or how you try and influence policy, which are some of these larger, from my perspective, these are the larger levers that we have to pull on, but they have to start from the individual, right? Potentially.
Yeah, I have a final comment. I have to leave for another meeting in 8 minutes, but maybe we could reach out to Newton Harrison. I think he's still alive. Helen died. They did 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, these environmental art projects, right at the beginning of the first environmental movements. And in the last steps of their work, they were working with the California Forest Service, helping trees migrate uphill. And part of it was just analyzing which kinds of trees were going to die as the climate went up in California. And then if we want those kind of trees to survive, artists would go to the top of the mountain and plant them where the climate is going to be okay in 2029. I wonder what his perspective is on all this. I mean, he's done artistic installations for 50 years. Originally, the environmental movement, before it was called climate change, I mean, it was pollution and blah, 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 blah. I wonder what his conclusion is. Have you, Nina, been in touch with Newton? When I arrived in Dallas, he and Helen came and visited, and they wanted to do a big ecology project around the Trinity River, which is this sort of cement stream that runs through Dallas. And the city was putting a huge new freeway along the river, and they wanted to stop it. Janelle Engelstadt, who runs an organization called Making Art with Purpose, would also be a really interesting person to reach out to on this. Do you know Janelle? Okay, her project is called Making Art with purpose, and she's worked in a whole variety of contexts, all the way from refugee camps to Central Europe, because she was very worried about forced migration in Central Europe. So, you know, as you go forward with this project, maybe we could bring into the discussion Newton, if I think he's alive, but I'm not sure.
I mean, that's what Wikipedia it says he's still alive. Helen's not around.
Well, Wikipedia does have fake news in it.
I think he's still like.
Well, no, I was in touch with him when Helen died.
Okay.
But
I mean, I'm not familiar with Helen's work or Helen or Newton's work or Janelle's work. So thank you for sharing this. Just even having the ability.
One of the projects they did, and I think they showed it in one of the in the Oakland Flatlines gallery that Greg Harper's wife runs, and it was just a simulation of England, showing exactly how small England had become after 100 years of climate change. And it was just so simple. You walk in, oh, London's disappeared, it's underwater. Oh, so, and I guess that gets back to Joel's comment, which is, how do we provoke people who see your installation to think differently when they walk out? And you know, my idea of dropping an asteroid on them is maybe not a very useful suggestion.
It certainly would be provocative.
Well, yeah, right. And trust me, I'm an artist. I don't have to get permission to kill people. Just come to my horror film and have a heart attack.
It's kind of like an inverted Chris Burden piece of sorts.
Okay, I'm going to stop there and let you finish the discussion. Thank you, Raphael, for stirring the provocation pot.
Thank you for including me. I really
no, and then, you know, part of our lack of methodology is then we'll think about how we might follow up with you.
Yeah, I would love to continue the conversation, especially hearing more about the terminology, riffing on the terminology. I think there's a lot to delve into there.
So we can continue for a bit if everyone has time.
Yeah, I've got some time. So if you all are open to it, I am open to it.
I am definitely. I think sometimes, and I catch myself doing this, is that when we start talking about provocation and change and impact, and it really it's as if we our expectations get built around this idea of somehow it's not just a tipping point, but the notion of what change looks like is radicalized, and meaning it has such a differentiation from what was before. Now there's this, it's like there's that kind of shift that somehow takes place. And I think certainly provocation and change can be much more transitory and fluid and unpredictable. It's hard to, in the case of the asteroid, it's either going to hit us or it's not going to hit us. I get that. Climate change is a bit more complicated because it hits us really, really slowly, as you pointed out. And as we all know, is we're just because we're experiencing weather changes around the world, that's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And so we can't just. So I think we should be very careful about what we mean by the trajectories of change. What that means to us, and it doesn't mean that it's one thing or another. But I think when we're talking about specific artworks, I'm reluctant to sort of advocate. I guess I would beg issue with Roger's perspective of, you need to hit people over the head with a provocation. I'm not sure that's the case. I think it can be much more subtle than that, and actually not even realized as a provocation.
Yeah.
Until 50 years later.
Yeah, that's kind of where my head's been at, more of the subtle approach, because as we've been talking about, it is much more gradual, and your set point changes the whole time.
Exactly.
Like right now, I mean, just experiencing this heat dome that was in Portland, it was 115 degrees. It was bonkers. And also experiencing issues of like other wicked problems, for example, not even climate change. For example, when I was a kid, I remember we went to Brazil, and we went and I grew up in Ohio, Joel, as you know, and homelessness wasn't really a big issue where I was. There were no camps. There was none of that happening. But I went to Brazil as a kid, and we drove through, and we happened to drive through the favelas. And it was the first time in my life I had ever experienced anything like that or seen anything like that. Probably like 9, 10 years old. And my mom's an immigrant from the Soviet Union. She said, "Oh, we don't have that in America." It's just kind of like, you don't see that sort of thing where we are. Yeah. And moving to California, that's in your backyard. That you see that all the time. So your set point changes, right? And so it wasn't like a gradual thing or it wasn't a sudden thing where it was immediately like, oh my gosh, but it was almost like it just became more normalized. Like just seeing the massive inequality became more normalized. And I think the same thing applies with climate change. And like last year there were 2 heat waves. A couple of years ago, there were fire. The smoke was a thing. Now the smoke is like an expected thing. It's shocking, but it's not like an asteroid hitting you over the head.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because if you watch the evening news, and you just look at the weather reports. Now the weather report includes models of smoke. You watch, like and you saw that with wind. And now we see it with smoke. It used to be clouds and rain. Mm-hmm. It's going to rain or it's not going to rain. Pretty simple. Snow or not snow. And but those changes that have happened. Nina, I'd be really curious what your thoughts on all this are.
Yeah.
You're muted.
Oh no, can't hear you.
Maybe muted.
Oh, you're muted.
The term provocation and provocateur, these are all active and sometimes aggressive terms. And change is not always active and aggressive. Change is, as you just all talked about, how it's not necessarily quick and aggressive. And I don't think it's necessary to inject aggressiveness and fast action into anything which indicates change, because before we provoke, we need to think and we need to come. And Roger is always very quick on with these things, but that's not life. That's not everyday life.
Yeah.
We should sometimes go to the basics, how we live, how other people live, how other people think of things, because that's the real life. And sometimes things you can bring about change slowly, as we were talking about the slow emergence. I really think that slow emergence is such an important concept, and we often get away from it. And your installation, as I said before, brings illumination for a large segment of the population. Yeah. So it's not just for the academics, not just for the artists. It is a really large and comprehensive. And I really think that is so important to keep that in mind, which, things are not always siloed, and we really should make sure that people in different places and different cultures, they get your message.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. I think it's interesting to note on slow emergence. I see Roger's point though too, but there, it's very context dependent, right? In the case of the asteroid, it's not slow emergence. It's kind of the slow emergence is this thing moving and knowing it's happening and knowing it's coming to us, but there will be an event. With the pandemic, in many ways, it was actually, there was slow emergence. We saw it coming, but then there was a binary when kind of the shelter in place happened and it was just shut down, right? In the case of climate change, it is slow emergence. It's just, we're just watching it. We're in many ways powerless. It's just coming here, right? There's just things that are out of control. And I would say with more of the wicked problems, maybe I'd have to go back to Horst and Riddle's definition of a wicked problem. I think they had like 10 criteria for a wicked problem. And I wonder if an aspect of a wicked problem is like just, there is no panacea, there is no solution to it, there is no kind of thing that solves it. Yeah, I don't know. It just has me thinking about almost like mapping some of these massive things that can induce change, and where do they fall on this continuum of slow emergence to binary catastrophic event, there, and feels like there's a gradient there.
We talked about the weather, but what about the water levels? I mean, there is an artist, and a Montreal-based artist, her name is Liz Miller, and I curated her artwork, which talks about the raising water levels. And she's a filmmaker, and she went around the world, literally around the world, and talked to people who are on little islands or, in the Asia Pacific, all over the place, and who give you a first-person testimonial how their very house and land is going to disappear in a foreseeable future.
Interesting. That I'm working on this project on the Gila River ecology.
Yes.
That I'm getting ready to go to, and a big part of that is obviously around the water resource issue. But I was in conversation with a guy named Charlie Haley, who's at the University of Florida in Gainesville, who's an architect, and he's not a traditional architect. They have a really interesting program at Gainesville. What he's been writing about is the observation from the front porch, observing climate change from the porch. Literally, that idea.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That sitting on the front porch and watching this happen over years.
Yeah.
There's a kind of knowledge that emerges from that you can't get at in any other way, Yeah. And it's not the scientist who's doing that work, and from Ohio, there's a lot of porches in Ohio, but you've seen the porch reemerge in the suburbs of California and around the world, and even the nomadic mobile porch of the RV, where there's this kind of experience and observation factor that goes into what we're describing. And I often think about this sort of like I mentioned earlier, this idea of this technological gaze, that if we only come at it from that frame, looking at, what's the technological idea here, what's the solution, how do we enact change, we kind of miss a huge piece of being human, and its relationship to these really complex issues. So I don't know, that's like
that really resonates with me, especially on so many different fronts. As someone who works professionally as a designer in the technology space, right? And it's a lot of the times you're here, you know, the problem is the nail, technology is the hammer. It's like, what's the techno-solutionist approach to this? When really there's so much relationality, you know, human to human, human to non-human, non-human not meaning technology, but rather, you know, the planet, the environment, etc. How do we become more relational as opposed to just kind of more solution oriented, like see ourselves in relationship to other things, right? Rather than trying to just constantly solve things, constantly fix things. And that I think is really there's something quite poetic about watching it from your front porch, or just observing, or just experiencing, or just being, right? How are we able to just be? And there's another component of that too, which is to say, you know, it's almost something like, there's almost something Buddhist about it, which is saying, you know, there's the impermanence of this. There's almost just the act of just sitting with it, right?
Right. Well, and we live in not we, but globally, but, you know, I think it's fair to say that there has been an acceleration of observation because of media and technology over the years. And that acceleration of observation has changed expectations about how things should happen and at what pace they should happen.
Yeah. And also, you know, the other thing to note about the acceleration of observation too, I don't know about you, and maybe this is just kind of my bubbles, but to me, there's more of an acceleration of firsthand observation, because there's becoming an increasing distrust in the kind of secondhand observation of hearing it from the news or hearing it from someone else. It's like, no, I want to see this with my own eyes. I want to actually understand this firsthand. I want to, you know, sit with this a little bit more.
Yeah, agreed.
And different people on different porches and different
Yeah.
corners in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking with Joel once, one of our conversations about hearing from people. Not we already did about hearing from people from different corners of the world, but also to do something about different professions or no professions. Because when we talk about interdisciplinary conversations, we talk about people who are maybe engineers, maybe whatever, artists, or designers, what you name. But what about talking to people, you know, who are postmen and who are in our society, and we have no clue what they are thinking, you know, or bricklayers or judges, or you know.
100%.
I really look forward when Joel, once we can do something like that. That would be so information, you know, so much information.
Joel, are you doing something kind of similar to that with your project right now? You're kind of going out and getting the firsthand experience and kind of widening the lens, so to speak.
Well, we're trying to embrace a lot of these concepts we're talking about, and it's hard, you know. But yeah, the idea is to become part of, as best one can, some communities, these ecologies that are specific to regions of the river, and to be able to have conversations with, you know, the local the kindergarten teacher, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whose house is, you know, on the river, and you know what's going on in their heads about these things. You know, what do they, how is it shaped how they view the world or see things, and you know, it's not always you know, that part of the U.S. where this river flows is not, it's not highfalutin, you know.
Yeah.
It's not, it ain't Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And that's really important to me, is to be able to step outside of this academic world that we operate in, and you know, and listen and observe, you know, 'cause I think that's part of the recipe for addressing these wicked problems, as you say, you know, where there are no solutions. And I believe that in my heart. I believe there are no solutions.
No, everything is, you know, it's almost like, trying to think of the analogy of like the gopher hole thing, right? So you just block one, you think you solve it, and then something else pops up, you know, and it's kind of just constantly doing this sort of thing. You don't really solve a wicked problem, you manage it, right?
Right. And we hear it in Vanya's voice. I mean, we hear it in her voice or your mannerisms, and when you're talking, you know, when you're talking about your personal experience of going to the recycler. I mean, it's all there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that's why those perspectives are so critical if we're going to do anything.
Vanya brings so much extra color.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because
Because it's someplace else, it's some levels, you know, also it's really invaluable because so many people just sit in their own little bubble and never even, I mean, this doesn't resolve anything, but at least it's you know, it's not, it's a voice, which is great.
I just believe we need collaboration, and if I can be a collaborator here, I'll do so. But yeah, my sister and her boyfriend have a brand of screen printed t-shirts, and they have a t-shirt that they haven't printed for me because I haven't paid. But they have a t-shirt that says it's like a lucha libre poster, and it says the world will be collaborated and not competitive, or it won't be. And I truly believe that we need to collaborate and see each other as equals, even though we come from different backgrounds, to change something, politics, climate change, anything.
Yeah,
But even before change, just to know about it, just to hear about it, just to, you know, listen to it, that's already a start.
Yeah.
But I not to be the pessimist here, but things change, and things stay. The more things change, the more they stay the same, right? So, and I mean, I think that there's some truth to that, but not all change is good. Change for change's sake, I don't know. You know, I mean, I think we experience change all the time.
From the very beginning, it has been changed.
From the moment you're born, yeah, it's a constant flow, you know. And so there's it's just this issue of not only how do you contend, but it goes back to Raphael, I think what you're saying, and I was trying to get at right in the beginning of the conversation, is trajectories, paths that we choose to take and don't take, both as individuals and as a public, and as a community, and as collaborators. You know, we have the ability to make, sometimes the ability to make individual decisions, but not always.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those decisions are made for us, and you know.
Vanya, can we not do something about this constant change? Can we not have a longer time? Is it a question of money, or what is it?
I can't pay for it, but I think it could.
I'm asking, is it a question of money, not who pays?
I've got a Zoom account, so the next time, if you all would love to have me back, I'm happy to manage the Zoom invite whenever my appearance is welcome, and to be a fellow member of the provocateur tours here. Well, you should call yourselves the peri-pandemic provocateurs, though. The pandemic is not over.
No.
It is not over.
Yeah. It's kind of funny in a way. I mean, the whole terminology is pretty ridiculous, you know.
I love it. I mean, I think it's provocative in and of itself, right?
It's first thing anybody's going to say is there's no post. That's not the post we're talking about. We're talking about the post that sticks in the ground. That post.
Joe.
I don't know. You make your excuses as you go.
Love it. Love it.
Raphael, this has been fantastic. I also have to hop off here, so I'm I have to say.
Yeah.
I should head out too. Thank you all so much for inviting me. Thank you, Joel, for including me in this. Truly enjoyed the opportunity to chat with you all, have conversations. Would love to do it again.
Yep.
And Raphael, before you go, I will look up the documented things because you want to move ahead slowly, not
I would
slowly.
love to. I would love to show it.
I'll
Yeah,
be in
I'm-
touch with you.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to show it. I'm writing up a proposal for Isaiah. Would love to, I'll look into ours when they have their call open up next year. That could be a good venue. Documenta would be wonderful. Any other suggestions? I'm all ears for this too. So
Okay.
thank you all so much. Vanya, it was so nice to meet you. Oh,
Just one last note.
Rixi, Raphael, before you go, Rixi, RIXC, Rixi in Latvia. They have a call out.
okay. RIXC. Okay.
Also, something to pay attention to here for all of us going forward is that the UN is embarking on a art and climate change initiative, and it's really aimed at policy level issues around, but I think we should all sort of pay attention to what is going on there. I'll get more information about that and share it with everyone.
Okay.
That'd be great. Yeah, it'd be great to all collaborate on something.
Yeah, I just met the lead guy on that last week, so it'll be, maybe we can get him in on one of the conversations.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Vanya, Joel, Raphael, Roger,
Thanks so
everybody.
much. It's great to see everybody. Have a
Nice
great
to meet
weekend.
you. Sorry, my Zoom. It's
No problem.
Portal's account Zoom.
All good. It was so nice to meet you. Thanks for everyone's input and conversation. And yeah, have a great weekend.
Right, you too.
Bye.
Yeah.